So hello, good evening and welcome everyone. This is week 19, would you believe we've made it to week 19 of our conversations on community resilience in changing times. And this is the last of our pilot series conversations. And we have Kathy and Viviana back with us again for part 2 of our conversation on work and money. Big welcome to both of you. Thanks for coming back and talking with us again.
Thank you.
Great. So, Kathy, I wonder if you could just share a bit about what we'll be talking about this evening.
Yes, certainly. I think the overview is we're looking to challenge our unconscious perceptions around work and money and look to move ourselves to be creating situations where our work is nourishing for ourselves, our lives and our world. So we're not in a situation where we're just working for money, but we're looking really at our whole attitude to work and our attitude to money.
Right, thank you. Thank you very much. So just to mention that we did advertise having 3 of us on this conversation this evening. MARIANELA was supposed to be joining us, who is a professor in Venezuela. Unfortunately, she's not been able to join us because of a family bereavement. So Viviana knows her quite well, and so we'll be sharing some of her what's the word? The jewels that she had to offer to this conversation a bit later in the conversation. So we'll say a bit more about that. So I'll just, for anyone who hasn't watched part 1, I'll just reintroduce the 2 people we have this evening, and then I'll invite them to say a bit more. So first of all, we have, I've just lost my screen. We have Viviana JIMENEZ, who is Director of Sustainability and Blue Economy. She is currently evolving into a systems change enabler and also works with feminist economics. So really glad to have you back again, Viviana.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And we have Kathy HILTON back for the 4th week in a row. Kathy's back with us again. So Kathy is an Artisan of Cultural Regeneration and facilitating social change through awareness. Really glad to have you back for our last of the pilot series again. Great.
Thank you.
Great. And David is here with us again. David, would you like to tell us what you'll be doing this evening?
Yes, so I'm here to link up the event as it happens on Zoom with the event as it's relayed from Zoom onto Facebook. And you will see on Facebook that you can make comments. So if you want to put in a comment or an appreciation or a question, please do that and I will pass them on to the team. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you.
Thanks, David. So sorry I was just thinking, because of we're missing MARIANELA, but actually I'm going to swap our questions around if that's right. So I'm going to ask Viviana a question, if that's okay first. Viviana, with your work in so many parts of the world, you've seen how the relationship people have with work and money changes radically as the social stability changes. I wonder if you would mind telling us a bit more about that.
Yes, and this is actually something that has come up quite a lot in the last few weeks for me. And this idea of work and money really depends on the context that you are living at any point in time. And I guess our relationship to work and money also changes quite dramatically depending on our context. And I guess since you asked the question, I would want to share some of the wisdom that MARIANELA has shared with me, and why, you know, I thought she would be a great person to talk to us today. And she, well, as you said, she is in Venezuela. And for those who don't know about what's going on in Venezuela, I invite you to read up on it. But there is at the moment a political crisis there. There is a military dictatorship. And what's interesting to me about this example itself is that 25 years ago, Venezuela was a very prosperous country. And, you know, people migrated there for jobs and work and all of these things. And because of the political situation, in my view, because of extreme inequality, populism took course, and then was turned, for some years it was populism, then it turned into a military dictatorship. And today, many people are leaving the country, have left actually in the last 10 years. Those who could have left, those who couldn't are walking across borders. I'm originally from Colombia, and so a lot of people have come into Colombia, but also everywhere. Some people are walking from the north of South America to the south of South America just by foot, leaving, you know, really a situation of crisis. And unfortunately, this crisis was made because it's political. But, you know, as we talk, you know, about this, you know, to your audience, about resilience and about times of crisis, what strikes me as important is that it can come from anywhere, and you may not be able to actually plan ahead for it. And in this way, resilience becomes, I think what we think about resilience changes a little bit, because resilience, to me, it is a muscle that you kind of build up. But it's also, you can't really plan for resilience. You can maybe have some idea of the important aspects of resilience, but it's not something you plan for until you are living in a context where you are required to have it, or required to use it, or required to actually build it up. And I think that's really, really important, because a lot of people think that you kind of have this magic formula for resilience and then that's it. No, it's something that you are building, and it's not something that's planned, because it's precisely how do you confront uncertainty? That's basically what it is. So again, going back to Marianela and some nuggets of wisdom, she has, you know, she's a university professor. She did her PhD in Europe. She is one of those people that could have easily left the country when things started to get really bad, like so many people have, but she and her family decided not to. And so to me, this was really interesting because a lot of the time when we talk about crisis, or the way I've seen it explained is, you know, you kind of have to go towards the life raft and get out of the sinking ship. And it was almost like, she even mentioned it in those terms. She was like, I'm not leaving the sinking ship. And this was a conscious decision that I made with my family, because what we decided is we're going to try to help each other while the ship is sinking, and try not to sink with the ship. And to me, that was a huge, I wouldn't say really awareness, because, but it was more like, wow, this is so valuable. It is so valuable because that is what we should be focusing on, not trying to save ourselves individualistically, or even if it's myself and my family. It's kind of like community matters. And if we all stayed in the sinking ship, most likely the ship would not sink. So that was one of the things that I thought was really nice and valuable about speaking with her initially. I guess, you know, something else that she has mentioned a lot is that what helps her on a daily basis is staying true to her values and acting with coherence. And I think this is the case for anybody, really. When you are true to who you are, it's much easier to live the daily life, whether you're in crisis or not. So, you know, in times of crisis, I think this becomes even more important. And then, well, the third thing, which I think we all know about, is, you know, money and work, as I've said, don't really matter when you're in crisis, or I guess change. Not that they don't matter, it just changes, the concept changes. And what becomes more important is trust, and those networks of trust that are going to help you on a day-to-day basis. So yes, those are kind of three really nuggets of wisdom that to me are important to the audience who's hearing this.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for sharing that little bit of what Marianela was bringing to this conversation. I was also really touched to hear her experience of making an active choice not to jump ship and to stay in the sinking ship, and to support particularly the indigenous people in Venezuela as well. So yeah, and I just wonder, because I forgot to ask, I meant to ask at the beginning, like, how has it been since our first conversation, and was there anything that came up for you from our first conversation that would be quite interesting to share?
Me again, or is
yeah, I'll stay with you for a sec. Yeah.
So yes, I think a lot of things have come up since that first conversation for several reasons. One specifically is, and again, I don't know if you've heard, but if you haven't, I invite you to read up on it. I'm from Colombia, and there's a lot happening politically and socially in Colombia. At the moment, there were some protests that started on the 28th of April. And again, we go back to the basic issue, and this is inequality. And the more I've thought about it and the more I analyze it is, you know, anywhere in the world where there is growing inequality, it's kind of the ripe terrain for so many problems, for example, populism and violence and whatnot. And so that's one thing. And in thinking about work and money, I think we think about working money as something that's always there and always stable to a certain degree, that if we don't have money, we can go we can get out and work for it or get it somehow. And for many people around the world, that is not the case. Actually, for the majority of people around the world, that is not the case. And so I think that's one thing that has been quite present for me recently. The other thing that also has been very present is this idea of planning to be resilient. It's almost like an oxymoron, because being resilient is about uncertainty. It's about kind of being somewhat okay with the uncertainty. And I think the best way to plan for uncertainty is to realize that nothing is certain. And that shouldn't cause us fear at all. That is actually somewhat liberating. Because when you realize that, I think just your perception changes, and maybe your values start to change as well, which makes it easier to deal with that uncertainty or that instability when it happens. So I think those two things did come up for me since our last talk.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. I really appreciate your thoughts around that, actually, and particularly as someone who's got more of a perception of what collapse really looks like. Because that's, you know, when I was thinking about part 2 of this conversation and work and money, and as I sensed particularly what MARIANELA was sharing, I just thought, you know, work and money just dismantles, actually, when the crisis hits. You know, like, what matters is values, resources, how we're looking after each other. They're the things that actually really, you know, work and money just falls away, doesn't it? You know, those things aren't actually that relevant. So thank you. And Kathy, was there anything for you that came up from our last conversation?
I have us divided into 3 different stages within that reality. So, and I imagine our audience will be in one of these 3 stages. So there is people for whom work and money are interesting things they do with their lives. So a career is a choice, and you look at what you're good at, you look at what's going to be interesting, what's going to pay you well, and that's very much your perspective. And for most of the affluent world's population, that's been absolutely the priority for decades. And then probably a large part of our audience, given the subjects we're covering, are people who have started to have a real consciousness around what the impact of their work is. So rather than work just be a means of taking care of oneself and perhaps giving one an identity, giving one a status, people have started to look at, well, not started to, people have been addressing the ecological crisis, the social crisis, and looking at being responsible around that. We had a planning conversation with VIVIANA and MARIANELA, and it was clear that that's still a privileged position, to be imagining that we have time to be making a difference. Imagine that we have time to be choosing work, and that we can be effective in the ecological crisis. And what is referred to as the global north, I think is regarded with something of is regarded as naive to a large part of the population of the world, who are already in crisis. And as we're saying, the relationship with work and money strongly changes. And another aspect that I always bring to my work is influenced by what people think, influenced by the reports of what people think about as they're facing the end of their lives, when people are really at that point, when people's consciousness, when people's priorities change because they're at the end of their lives, they believe they're at the end of their lives. People are never focusing on their work. People are focusing on the connections that they had and how much spirit they lived with, how much they expressed their spirit. And I wonder how we can all, how we can live that now with all those different phases that we might be in, whether we believe that we can and we should be using our work to address the ecological and the societal crises, whether we're experiencing it already being too late to do that. What is the opportunity of humanity? What is the opportunity of life? What is the opportunity to express our spirit? And I do think it's entirely true that when it comes to it, what is valuable to all of us is our connections, it is our relationships, not just our nearest and dearest, but what we were in all of our communities. And what certainly I have prioritized over recent years is becoming somebody of value in my communities. So because it has so many different good impacts. So it gives me a sense of fulfillment. In a crisis situation, there's more chance of survival because I'm valued. And I'm only going to be valued if I'm contributing. So I'm looking continually at what I'm contributing, and some of it's great and some of it's not, and being realistic about that. Yeah, that's what's been there for me since the last conversation.
Thank you. Oh, my mind's going in lots of different places right now. I'm not quite sure which thread to follow. I mean, I am just thinking in one way, I'm thinking, you know, what is the most valuable thing we can kind of speak to today when we think about work and money, given what you two have already said, that actually maybe it's a bit of an oxymoron that we're even exploring it in this way. What's the most valuable thing that we could be focusing right now? I guess, Viviana, I'm kind of interested to direct this question at you, given what you just said. And also given your experience of what MARIANELA said and your personal experience, what is the most valuable thing that you think in the UK we could be focusing on right now in relation to this?
Yeah, so as Kathy was speaking, this also popped up for me, and I think one very important aspect of our relationship to work and money and each other actually is empathy. Empathy is such a big deal, and you know, especially in those societies that are better off than others. You know, we tend to think of, I may pop in many different aspects, which I know we'll get to at some point, so I'm sorry if I start mixing up everything, but those of us who are better off economically, and maybe politically, we have more stability somehow. We tend to, I think, romanticize certain things that the people who don't have those perceived certainties know. Something that for me is very obvious is, you know, this idea of becoming local, and localism, I think, has been over romanticized for many reasons, which we may get into or not. And why do I say this? Because we tend to think as local, and there are some things that are better off doing it locally, for example, growing our food, or maybe some types of governance, local governance systems. But we do have to remember, especially in thinking about the ecological crisis that we are now experiencing, which is not local, it's a global reality. We need to continue to think about those who are furthest away from us. Because first, they're probably the ones that are going to be most impacted by it, or first impacted by it. But also because we depend on each other, and we need to become aware that this interdependency is not only one way. And something that I'm starting to work on a bit is these narratives that we hold true, that actually, when you think about them, they're not. One of them being the rich, it is the duty of the rich to help the poor develop. It's kind of, well, this idea of development needs to be turned upside down, because that's not working for the vast majority of people. So no, it is not the rich that have to help the poor develop. Maybe it's the rich that have to understand that that doesn't work, and what can we learn from the mistakes, but also from the people who are already facing crises or are experiencing different levels of instability for whatever reason. And I find that, you go through a lot of different aspects in life, and there are these narratives that we are taught and that we believe to be true, that if you think about them are not. And in that way, continuing these narratives, or maybe seeking solutions following these narratives, are probably not going to work, because we're already building them on false narratives in a way. Yeah, so that I think is very important. And if we go back to empathy, I think that's one, or the most important thing that we need to be focused on. When we have that empathy, we can begin to understand all of these uncertainties that we believe to be true. I think that is, and actually this also reminded me of something Marianela said to me that I thought was also very important in talking about empathy. She explained one experience that she had in Spain, actually, where she did her PhD. She was visiting with a Venezuelan family who had left because of the crisis. And the father of that family, his father was dying in Venezuela that night that she was over for dinner or whatever. And the father, well, he went up to his room because his father was dying. Obviously, he was grieving. But his daughter came down, and she was really nonchalant about it. Oh, yeah, my grandfather's dying, and then kept eating. And for Marianela, it was like, wow, there is such disconnection. And that disconnection, I think, is a mode of survival. Because when you have to leave the people you love and the land you love, which almost everybody leaves because they have to, not because they want to. Very few people have the opportunity to choose and want to leave. A lot of people, migrants, are forced to leave many ways. And that has a real impact in your emotions. And it's almost survival to cut, in a way, those emotional ties. But that has a consequence, and the consequence is that it's very difficult to build maybe those bonds of empathy when you have had to cut them in a way. And I think, this has happened over decades, over centuries, and we have cut maybe for survival mode. I don't know if every time it's been for survival, but we have cut those. And I think it's time to maybe build them up again and try to become more, empathy to me is the base.
Yeah, I hear you. Thank you. And one thing that stood out, there's lots of things that stood out in what you said, but one thing that really resonated for me in an experience I've had is around the, I guess it's an element of colonialism that we think that we have to fix something that's broken over here, like I'm thinking of particularly when indigenous people were called savages, and the church thought that they had to fix them, that they were savages, and they had to educate them and develop them and that kind of thing, and just the ignorance of that, the absolute blind ignorance. And it's a blind ignorance. It's not a poorly intended ignorance. I think it's just a blindness. And an experience I had when I spent some time in Peru, and I worked in a project in South Peru, where I worked with these families, where I was really humbled in so many ways by the experience of working with these families. But one thing that particularly stood out to me was the happiness of the children there. And these children had materially nothing. They had materially nothing. You know, they had the clothes on their back. A couple of them had little toys and teddies, which some of the volunteers had given them. You know, the parents, their whole day was taken up by the task of getting a bucket of drinkable water for their family. That was their whole day's task, was to not only get a bucket of water, but then make it drinkable. And I never took water for granted again after that experience. But what has still stayed with me so many years later was the happiness of these children. And I've worked with children in the UK for many years, 20 years now. And our kids are really unhappy, you know, in this developed country, our kids are really unhappy. And it's just, for me, it's an example of, you know, is empathy the way that we can actually dismantle our ignorance? And actually, you know, I feel like we need to learn from those people. I have no idea of what I could offer to them, but I feel like they have so much to teach us. And those kids taught me a lot about what we're doing wrong in our country. And yet we perceive them as being underdeveloped and poor, you know, and like, I was like, these kids are so rich in a way that our kids are not rich at all in England. So it's a little example of something that came up for me.
If I can just say two things with respect to what you've just said. You know, originally, now it may be ignorance, but originally it was very strategic and it was intended. It wasn't really ignorance. It was a strategy to achieve whatever. And maybe now it is ignorance because people don't care to learn or whatever, but it was very strategic at first, and especially with colonialism, since you mentioned it. And the second thing, which actually we did mention it in part one, and that I think is important, and going back to this idea of over-romanticizing things. You do need your survival needs met. You need food, you need clean water, you need the basics. You need a home to put your head to sleep at night. However, yes, this whole idea of having stuff is not necessary at all, other than, you know, once you are surviving nicely, then you don't need stuff. But yes, I just wanted to make those 2 points.
Yeah, absolutely. And these, you know, obviously the families I was talking about, their lives were massively challenged, but yeah, I know, I agree with what you're saying. Thanks for mentioning that. So Kathy, I wonder if I could just pick up with you the question we talked about beforehand, which is to ask you if you can say a bit more about the dominant relationship that people have with work and money in our culture.
Yeah, I can. So it's almost hard to explain because it's so ubiquitous. It is so assumed, so given, that it's very hard for people to know that it's a culturally influenced reality rather than a real reality. I've been doing some work recently following my own realization. So I was a designer running producing a housewares collection until 2 years ago, and I came to appreciate that all of my marketing was a subliminal communication of buy things and you'll be happy, and that was immoral. It was immoral to be building a cultural conversation telling people to buy things so that they'll be happy. Obviously, I didn't say that specifically, but fundamentally, every time I took a beautifully artful photograph, that was my intention. That was my psychological manipulation. So I closed my company, and in doing so, I lost actually all of my money. I mean, really all of my money. And I lost my home and my status, my sense of self, which put me into a huge inquiry. You know, I went really deep into discovering a self beyond all of the perceived sense of self. and this has led me to appreciate that all of us, it's so very dominant in the developed world that we're on a quest for money. We see money as the solution to everything. We believe we need money for everything. So we believe we need money for our security, for our health, for our sense of self. I hope it's clear what I mean by that. So when you feel your bank balance, your bank balance affects how you feel. When it's at one level, you feel good. When it's at another level, you feel bad. And we have become a culture that totally encourages that. We perpetuate it for each other. We are so advertised to that we only notice a certain level of the advertising that happens. We don't notice how much we have been indoctrinated with identifying ourselves with money, with things in the money realm. And as such, we live with a quest for money. So it's very rare that somebody will pick a job that is worse paid than another job they could have got because of addressing the impact of the work that they're doing. It's very rare for people in the developed world to make that kind of an assessment and calculation. Most people will prioritize earning. So our whole life has become a quest for money. Then we're on this hamster wheel, then we're super stressed, then we are putting money towards many things to try and alleviate our stress. And we're stressing the planet. So we are using up so much resource so much natural resource to counter our stress. So we may be even, oh no, I don't want to say that. There is, I hope I can just say, I hope people will just appreciate, there is just the most phenomenal amount that we do to try and unstress ourselves in response to how much we have stressed ourselves in a quest for money. And I want to bring the concept of holisticism into this. So something that is holistic, being an addressing of the whole system. So we only address what we get out of our work, what we get out of money. On the whole, we only address what we're getting. And if we gave equal respect to what our work was doing, what impact our work was having on the world, what impact our being, even how our work created us. So if your work makes you a stressed person, if your work has any sort of a negative impact on your mental health, that has an impact on your family, that has an impact on your community. This is all in the system of each of our work and money. If we address that as a whole system, and we said, not only do I need to be receiving money to be able to manage my needs, but also I'm going to address what I'm giving to the world and who I become because of my work. So whether I'm somebody who's fulfilled, whether I'm somebody who is selfish, whether I'm somebody who is really depleted and needing to do unhealthy activities to rebuild myself. This is a fundamental aspect of our relationship with work and money that is hardly addressed in our culture, and it's very much encouraged that it's not addressed, because when you are governing a nation, the only way our governments know how to have nations prosper is to improve gross domestic product. So the whole focus is on having people produce more and more, earn more and more. So there's very little encouragement for people to address this sense of self. I did hear that New Zealand had shifted from measuring gross domestic product to measuring mental health of population as a fundamental measure of the success of the nation. There's another point I want to make, but I'm not sure whether to whether to make it right now or to come back to it. I do want to talk about our relationship with what we need money for, but that may be later in the conversation and not an answer to the question you've asked right now.
Okay, no, thank you. Well, I'll try and come back to that later on. I'm just wondering, Viviana, if you have anything to add to what Kathy said, and I'm also curious about how it differs in the States at the moment. What's kind of going on there?
Yeah, so a couple of things about what Kathy said specifically. I think in addition to what she said about what we think we need money for, is this idea, you know, you have a lot of people who are, let's say, have the perception that they are less attached to money, and the way they justify seeking money is by saying, I want more money so I can help more people. Again, another false narrative in my view. And, you know, after thinking about this quite a lot, what I think is this has been something that has intentionally been created, that narrative. And I think, you know, if your actual goal is to help people, you do it all the time or whenever you can. You don't have to wait to get rich to do that. And in analyzing the people who actually help people and the people who hoard money, not to say that they don't overlap, some of them do overlap, obviously, but it's almost like, you know, the people who have as a priority to help people don't hoard money. They just, whatever they have, they give, right? And it's almost like a bit of the opposite of I want to get rich to help people, because in order to get rich, you almost undoubtedly have to hoard money, at least for some period of time. You're not sharing it, you have to hoard it. And so I think, you know, that is one thing that some people who seek money for whatever reason, and I think Kathy can maybe, you know, talk about this more, why people have that relationship to money, why people think they need money. Sometimes they kind of, it's a way of feeling better about yourself, saying, if I had more money, I could help more people. But we go back to this fundamental idea of why people think they need money or hoard money, or of course, and I will say this again, after basic needs are met, which is very necessary. So for many reasons. So that was one thing. And the other thing that came up from what Kathy was saying is that in debates today, in political debates today, in economic debates today, and for the past few decades, it's almost like we have forgotten how to imagine and how to have a vision for something different. Everything is basically, you either have capitalism or you have socialism, communism, call it whatever you want. But it's like we can't think of anything different than those two systems. And so when somebody supports communism, the other person is almost like, well, capitalism is the best we've had, so therefore we should continue this way. And that's where it ends. It seems like we forgot how to dream beyond these two systems that were, again, strategically imposed in different ways. And yeah, we don't look beyond that. And I hope that at this time we start really looking beyond capitalism as the predominant way that we do make money and work today, and communism or socialism or whatever you want to call it as the alternative way. There are infinite amounts of ways we could have something different, and it's time we kind of get out of that two-system mind frame of mind that we are currently stuck in, because it's not working for anybody.
And I'm just wondering at this point, you know, I'm aware that we're, in a way, this conversation is over three different kind of cultures, and that two of us are in the UK, and we're kind of really thinking about things here, and I really value what you're bringing to this conversation, and what Marianela in the background, she's somewhere in the background here, so I was bringing to this conversation, and I'm just wondering, you know, what can we really be doing here? I mean, what's our ignorance? What's our blind spots? What can we really, what's really the most valuable thing that we can be focusing on right now? Open to either of you. I don't know if anyone wants to, what's really, yeah, I don't know if I'm getting to the right question, but I'm just thinking, yeah, what is the most valuable thing that we can be giving our time to? Because I know that we are thinking, like, there's been conversations about changing our work from being not ethical to being more ethical, to being more focused on, you know, climate change, things like, is that a waste of time, or is there value in that, you know? Or could we be making better use of our time, while particularly in the UK at the moment we do have agency right now to make significant changes? So what's the best use of that?
I wouldn't say it's unvaluable at all. I think in everywhere in the world, this isn't just particular to the UK or the US, which are very similar. There's not a lot of difference as far as systems go. The UK obviously is a bit more social and is a welfare state. The US is absolutely not, but still very similar. And I think one thing that applies to the whole world is we need to unlearn a lot of what we know. Because as we have touched on this entire conversation, a lot of things were imposed strategically at one point in time to achieve something. And obviously going into the detail of that can take us years and years. But, you know, we are at a time when there is an imminent ecological collapse. There is rising inequality everywhere in the world. This no longer is about third world countries. This is everywhere in the world. And because of that, we are seeing more extremes, political extremes, social extremes. I mean, you see it in the UK, you see it in the US. I mean, Trump got elected because of this. So it is a time to, I think, for people to step back everywhere, but especially us who have the luxury of doing this type of thinking and of actually having some impact and some power over existing, you know, realities, institutions, whatever it may be. We need to start unlearning and thinking about things in different ways. And again, going back to empathy, I think this is where empathy is really useful, because if you are able to look at something from somebody else's perspective, it gives you a new, I guess, awareness, knowledge, whatever, to actually unlearn what you have learned. So I do think that is probably, to me, one of the most valuable things that we in the rich world who have the luxury of doing this type of work can do. And then using that new awareness to act, to influence wherever we feel it is necessary to influence. Yeah.
Thank you. Kathy, do you have anything to add to that?
So if your question, I'm just refreshing in my mind what your question is. If your question is, what's the most valuable thing we can do now? To me, it's always go to the nub of the psychology of it. Because if you change at that level, then all the actions flow from a very different mindset, and so much more healthy actions flow. If you don't change the fundamental mindset, then you're not working with human nature, you're fighting against somebody's instincts, and that's never going to work. Which fits nicely with what I wanted to say about our attitude to money, because I started, I saw in myself some things, and totally changed my mindset, and then tried to frame that into an exercise, a process that I could help other people to explore, so that everybody could get the benefit of it. And I'm calling it How to Have Less Money. And it's still under development, so I'm not making it totally broadly available right now, but I have started a Facebook page for it, which is called How to Have Less Money. No, yes, How to Need Less Money, How to Need Less Money. So we all have a sense that we need money, obviously, but the work that I'm doing with people is having you identify something that you feel you need money for, then having you list what you feel that will give you. Like, there is no judgment in it. We have needs, we have wishes, and we have a sense, we have a subconscious sense that if we have this thing, whether it's an object or a savings account, whatever it is, if we have this with our money, then it'll give us something. It'll give us some outcomes. It may be it'll give us a sense of security. It may be it'll give us an ability to connect with people that we want to connect with. They're very reasonable outcomes that we believe we'll get from the things that we want money for. And then I take people down levels of thought, levels of awareness. So I say, okay, if you've got this thing that you want to put your money towards, and you've had these outcomes, what does that give you? And if you have those outcomes, what does that give you? And if you have those outcomes, what does that give you? And it always gets people to a point of emotional tenderness, vulnerability, sacredness. There's a sudden rush of emotion for people. And it's always the case that when you look at what you want money for, deep down, there's this emotional thing that you believe you'll get from having that money. And it's always the case that that thing that you are imagining you need to put your money towards, if you bring yourself more fully to that, you can achieve it without the money. So if the outcome that you get down to is that I'll be able to be more confident, I'll be able to feel better about myself, I'll be able to connect with my family more, I'll be able to feel liberated. All of those things that are deep down what you're aiming for, people see, if I bring myself to that, I don't need the money. I don't need the money to achieve that for me. And if you can build that quality, if you can build bringing yourself to the situation rather than externalizing it and saying, I'm going to get this through a spend of money, or through a saving of money, or through a hoarding of money, then you build yourself, you build your spirit, you build your power, you build your sense of fulfillment. And over a lifetime, that's an extraordinary thing to build. Over a lifetime, it's a much better investment than a financial investment. And if people have that shift, then they completely change their relationship with what they need to be earning. And then they completely change their relationship with the work that they want to do. And then what they're bringing to the world is a totally different conversation. And if we do that with enough of the population, what we can create as a globe is very different to what we're doing now.
Thanks, Kathy. And just to say, wherever you're watching this conversation, we will post a link to your Facebook page. Is it? Or is it a page or a group? It's a page, isn't it?
It's a page, and it's only just beginning. So there's very little there right now, but if you were to like it, then as I add to it, and as I'm still working through this exercise with people to check what it does and make sure I'm delivering something that's really effective. So once I'm confident about that, then I'll be releasing it.
Thank you. Thanks for that. Looking forward to hearing more. And it does, yeah, it resonates with me, the importance of kind of getting under this, I guess, from a psychological perspective, getting under the projections that we have on money, and what we think we're going to get from it, which in a way kind of links back to what Viviana said at the beginning about being with the unknown. And engage, because I think a lot of what we put onto money is a sense of security. And if I have money, I will have security. I will have a known future. And it kind of, the feeling I have around it is that it kind of negates the inherent unknown that we all face in being human. So I think that's a lot of my perception anyway, a lot of what gets projected onto money, particularly out of those two things. David, I'm just wondering, are you with us at this point, and just wondering if there's anything you have to offer? I don't know if I haven't had any response from David, so just checking if he's still with us and if he's got anything to bring in.
No comments, I'm afraid. It's all quiet and all in front.
Okay, no worries, that's fine. Okay, just checking. So I wonder if we can speak now about independent systems. I know that's something we were going to talk about with Marianela. Viviana, would you like to say something about independent systems?
I will, but before that, something about what Kathy said, and that we haven't actually mentioned in this, I think we did mention in part one, is work and money and their relationship to each other. So in what Kathy was saying, I think there is an assumption that you work for money, and that is how you earn the money. I think that's not necessarily the case, especially in the richer world. You don't necessarily have to work for money, and actually many people do a lot of work that is not paid. Well, actually everywhere in the world, women do a lot of work that's not paid, and many people can, especially where there's more of a social safety net, they can work without needing to get paid for it. So I would just raise the thought of work and money, their relationship, and how that can also vary depending on context, on from person to person, and especially if you're kind of looking at how you value the work you do, how you earn for the work you do, or how you even get money, which doesn't have to necessarily be through working. So again, this idea of work is somewhat also personal, but we have been taught that it is the way we get money to live or to buy luxuries or whatever it may be. So yeah, I just wanted to make that point because I think that's a very important point. I think there are so many people in the world who work so much, but that's not how they get their money. Yeah. And going back to your question, Catherine, which was around independent systems. Yes. So to go back to one of, I guess, Marianena's experiences, and that we also see around the world, is when there is less stability, when there are those moments of crisis, there do tend to be more independent systems in the sense of people organize or self-organize to survive or to cooperate or to get whatever they need to get at any given point. And my personal view on that is, well, I guess before we go into my personal view, there are certain things that are required for those systems to thrive, one is trust. Trust becomes very important when you have independent systems. And I think that's probably the most important thing, having trust. And I would say that, you know, independent systems of governance and potentially independent systems of economic systems become very important. Independent economic systems become very important in those moments as well. Now going to my personal view is that, as with many things, we may tend to over-romanticize those independent systems as well, because some may work, but some you don't want to have them. And this was, I guess, one of Marianela's also feedback was you don't necessarily want that to stay forever, because there are things that need to come from the government or the global world that you can't get when you're independent. So something, for example, for her that is very true every day is that one way that she can get by day to day is actually by having those connections outside of her immediate community. Why? Because in her immediate community, a lot of people are struggling and a lot of people are living to cope. And so having those connections outside is really important to kind of have a different perspective, have a different view, have different energy. And then if you take that to the more practical, you know, you can have independent economic systems at a local level to barter or to trade or to buy or sell local products. But there is a need to have infrastructure. There is a need to have healthcare. There is a need to, even if you're charged for that healthcare, you need it. And I think that has also become very apparent during COVID. Those places that don't have, in the rich and in the not so rich world, that don't have access to healthcare, it's becoming overwhelming. So you do need certain systems to not be independent and to not be local. So there is, and then going back to the ecological crisis, you know, this is a global issue. We can't make that local. We can have some local solutions, but it is a global issue. And so we always need to think globally, whatever system we're trying to create or trying to build.
I really appreciate hearing that, actually, that Marianela's experience is that she needs that connection outside of what's going on in the immediate, because that's something you will only appreciate if you're in that situation. And that's actually really sobering for me to hear that. It's really sobering, because part of me, I think, is, I can be quite honest, I do over-romanticize this idea to relocalize, re-empower ourselves at a local level with our resources. And I think I would probably go nuts with that if that was my only reality. So I can really imagine, bless her, that she needs that. She needs that kind of connections outside of that, and that we need to be thinking on both levels. So yeah, thanks for mentioning that. Kathy, you've got anything to add at this point?
Well, we've talked about needing new ways of thinking, and there are areas where that's being addressed, and I'm wishing I had made notes of that before this conversation so I could point people to it. But certainly the person who's speaking on it I most value is Charles Eisenstein. So if you Google his name, you'll find a lot of YouTube interviews and a lot of books, and he's moved quite a long way through from idealizing, conceptualizing new systems to looking at what can really be implemented. And you'll find a lot of different communities who are discussing this. I bought a book recently. I'm just trying to see it on my bookshelf. Haven't started reading it, but it's called The New Possible. So it's really tangible solutions. One of which is our money system is such that money grows when it's not used. A concept that's been suggested is that the value of money we could change our economic system such that the value of money reduces when it's not used. And that changes then the impetus to hoard it, because it only retains its value when it's put to good use. And people have been addressing economic systems that could make that a reality. So those conversations are happening. If you go to Mighty Networks, there's a good, strong community there. Charles Eisenstein's community is called, I've forgotten. It'll come back to me, but he's got a strong community on the Mighty Network platform where this is being discussed and addressed. And he's in conversation with a lot of people who are bringing it to a current reality. And it is actually one of the things that COVID really has provided an opportunity for, because it stopped so much that we thought was unstoppable, and also gave a lot of people a pause from their busy lives. It has been a period where things that were fantasy-based rather than happening in reality, quite a few initiatives have been put into practice, have started to be implemented around the world.
Sorry, I was off the screen because I was trying to find a link for Charles. Charles's thing. Actually, I was trying to find a link for Mighty Networks. I know you've mentioned Mighty Networks before,
Yeah.
and I just Googled it, and there was lots of things that came up that didn't seem to be him. Is it something that Charles is actually created
It's actually
himself?
a platform. Mighty Networks is a platform, and a platform where you can host a community, and it facilitates discussion amongst like-minded people. So he uses it. He opted out of Facebook and set up this place for people to gather and work together. In fact, I'm gonna go and look for some links. If you carry on talking, I'll go and look for some things that I have previously found and come back to the conversation with them.
Okay, yeah, that's
Okay.
absolutely fine.
Okay,
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. So, although I'm not quite sure, because I was distracted a little bit because I was trying to find something for him. I mean, I'm trying to think what Charles Eisenstein's title is. Could it be spiritual economics or something like that?
He has several.
One of his books is Sacred Economics.
Sacred economics, yeah. Sorry,
Yeah.
Viviana, what did you say?
No, I was just saying that he has several books, so that, yes, that
Yeah.
was Sacred Economics is one of them.
Sacred economics, that's right.
And I think what's nice about what he has analyzed is this idea of the gift economy. So it really does change the concept. I will say that Islamic finance has, for, I don't know, centuries, but definitely for decades, looked at, you know, this idea of not rewarding money that is stored. So there are proven systems that have existed for decades that, you know, we can take examples from, and Islamic finance is one of those.
I'm so pleased to hear. I'd never heard of that, and I'm delighted to hear that is. I think absolutely it should be penalised and it should decrease if it's not being used. Well, what is the value apart from just making the rich richer in doing that? And yeah, anyway, yeah, I'm really pleased to hear that that's even a thought process, let alone that it's actually happening. That's great. Gift economy. You've just mentioned gift economy. What is gift economy? Just for those that don't know what gift.
Yeah, I'm going to very much oversimplify it, but it's this idea of gifting or buying things that we put personal value on. So it's really, I think, a change in looking at what the value of different things are versus what the price is. And yeah, so that's very much an oversimplification, but then that does change how we think of different products, how we think of this false idea of what will give us security, etc.
Kathy, any other perspective on gift economy?
Well, certainly looking at how you can interact without money being the means of exchange. So it may be that you do a service swap. It may be that, well, there's been a few different alternative currencies that have been developed, some regionally, some globally. There's one called Seeds, which I've been looking at. I think it's potentially excellent. And that's a system where your bank account grows because of what you give to a community. So you're rewarded for altruism rather than left depleted or left without the resources to cover your basic needs. To me, it covers any way of exchanging that isn't money orientated. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And I'm just wondering, as we're kind of coming up to nearing the end of our conversation, for both of you, what are you focusing on with work and money? I'd really love to hear from because a lot of what we've been talking about is quite abstract, and I'd really love to hear like what's your considerations at this moment around work and money. Are you reshaping things or rejigging things? What's happening in your individual lives? Viviana, do you want to go first?
Yes. So for some years, most of my work is not for money, which is why I made that point. I dedicate a lot of my time to working on projects that I find are important to me and fulfilling that are not paid. So that's one thing. And I guess for me, my focus also is a little bit at the moment in the projects that I'm doing. It's about trying to think about ways to come up with new visions for what we co-create moving forward. Clearly capitalism and communism, and they're not working for anybody. They work for some very few people for a certain amount of time, and then they don't. And I say this because the ecological crisis is an impending crisis that is going to affect all of us at one point, some faster than others. Well, it's already affecting some faster than others. But ultimately, we're all affected by these systems that don't work. I think one thing is there is a place for money. And I actually think Charles Eisenstein says this. There is a place for money in the sense of you do need to trade certain things, whether you call it, whether you're trading gold or cryptocurrency or whatever it may mean, it's still money, essentially. It's still used for that purpose, right? Where I think we have more opportunity is this idea of what we value. And that in itself, and I think it goes back to what Kathy's trying to do with, what are we trying to get at in our core when we are trying either to hoard money, to buy something for somebody or for ourselves or for our family? What is it that we are trying to get to? And almost always it has nothing to do with the actual thing that we're, again, after food and after sleep and after well-being, it has nothing to do with the actual thing, right? So, but there is a purpose for money, and we need to be aware of that. But it's about revaluing what or how we think about it and how we value. And I did want to mention this because it's come up for me several times during our conversation. But one thing that for many years in the sustainability conservation field, we have tried to do, or people have tried to do, is this idea of putting a value on nature. And the whole purpose behind that is to pay for whatever we destroy. And that's really about capitalism. And it makes no sense because, you know, I can pay $1 million to cut a tree, but the tree's still not going to be there after I cut it. And we may need that tree, whether I pay for it or not. So again, to me, and what I am working on, would want to continue working on, is this idea of co-creating a new system that we really need to unlearn to then reimagine, because at the moment, as I've said, we're stuck in this really 2, maybe 3 system view that is not allowing us to move forward, and that's really taking us down the rabbit hole. So yeah, that's where I am right now.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for sharing. And I mean, something that kind of sits in the background of this conversation very strongly for me is that, you know, part of the ethos of this project is that I want to encourage us to take responsibility for our role as human beings, in being human beings, as custodians of our earth. You know, that we are part of our earth. We are in relationship with our earth. This isn't an object to be exploited. You know, that is really at the center of what we're talking about. And so when we talk about these conversations around work and money, you know, and as I think about what am I focusing right now, for me, it's right. I need to reestablish that relationship, you know, and keep on reestablishing that relationship. It's still very much work in progress. And I feel like then all the considerations around community and work and money and resources all come from that, you know, all come from having a deeper sense of that relationship. So, so thank you for naming that, and it gave me a little opportunity to say that, because that's something that sits really importantly for me as we think about all of these things. You know, for me, our earth is part of our community considerations, or ideally at the center of our community considerations. So yeah. Kathy, what about you? What's happening in your life, and what are you reconsidering or looking at the moment?
So I did, after I closed my company, I did restructure my life so that in a gift economy way, I'm exchanging a minimal amount of work for a safe living situation. So I'm swapping a day and a half a week's work for a home, for housing, minimal housing, but it's an exchange, and that then gives me 5.5 days a week to deliver what I choose, and that's still evolving. So it has been 2 years of educating myself and changing my thinking, as Viviana has mentioned in this conversation. So the simple notion of colonialism, we're so unaware of how influenced our thinking is from the culture that we grew up in. And it's taken me 2 years of picking apart a pile of my presumptions to see what actually is going to be a real contribution to what the world needs, not just another case of an ill-informed person thinking that they're bringing solutions when they're actually creating more problems. So I'm still, after 2 years, in that thought process. One of the things I see that I do have expertise in is helping people who face that crunch point of seeing that I'm part of the problem. The work that I've been doing, the way that I've been living is part of the problem, and changing it is going to be so disastrous to my life. Stopping my work is going to be economically challenging at the least, but in my case, I couldn't even go get another job. I couldn't sell my company. So it was a total financial crash. And it took an awful lot of personal, psychological strength to navigate all of that. So I see I've got gifts now to help other people navigate that. So that's one of the things I'm looking to do for my work. And I'm also exploring, because in truth, I don't want, if I charge for it, then less people are going to engage. That's just a simple truth. And obviously I have needs. I can't feed myself without some money. I can't run a car without some money, and I need that for my day and a half, a week's work. So I'm looking at how I can I give my work away for free without any charge, or what systems can I put in place to, can I invite a bit of payment? Can I give it away for free but then invite a bit of payment, for example? A point I once saw Charles Eisenstein make with great grace and beauty was, a lot of people are exploring that, and we should all be a bit kinder to each other whilst we navigate this no man's land of, we know the old systems weren't working, we're looking to create new systems. It's a mess in the middle, it really is. People are trying different things, people are getting it wrong, and we should be kinder to each other while we experiment in those middle grounds.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. It's sort of yeah, my experience of something similar to that is I decided to shift away from work and money being the priority and to prioritize well-being. So I made a very active choice to put well-being at the center, and then work out work and money around that. So like if I put my well-being first, what does that look like in terms of work and money? So that was my reconfiguration. But as you mentioned, it's a bit messy in the process. And you know, I was doing quite an intense job before where I just was not well in that work, and I couldn't maintain my well-being. And so it's been quite a sort of like messy, very, very messy, actually, not quite, like very messy process to kind of collapse one system and to develop something else. And it's still very much in process. But yeah, I like the idea and the invitation to be a bit kinder to each other as we transition from one system to another. Yeah, go on.
Another really important point in that is the difference in doing all of that as a single person, doing it in a committed relationship, and doing it when you've got dependents. And another point to have huge compassion around is that we are all going to be in different places along that path. So it's very easy to invalidate people who are not at the same place you are on that path. And that is entirely counterproductive. So to have compassion for people who have not had the same information that you have, because we all form our beliefs and our conclusions and our view of what's necessary because of the information we're exposed to, and people have been exposed to entirely conflicting information. So there are people prioritizing very different things. So having grace, if we go back to the model that we've referred to a few times in this series that Sandra White gave us in the first talk on dismantling conquest, of holding another person's validity. So holding the validity of their experience and their views, respecting that it has validity, and then looking to work with it rather than condemning it.
Thanks for mentioning that. David apparently is going to pop in and ask us the question. David?
Well, I think it ties in with what Kathy has just been saying. First of all, it's been really interesting hearing your perspectives on work and money. So I thought I'd share mine, which is I have a job which I used to really not enjoy. And it's a very ethical job. And because I've changed my attitude towards it, suddenly I'm really enjoying it. And I'm doing very well at it, and I'm earning far more money. Now, I had a very interesting experience in meditation where it was made very clear that I'm being given money. And I'm really enjoying the whole process. So it occurred to me, what if it wasn't about the current system or a new system, but what if it was about a flow of money, a flow of energy that could include money, could not include money? How could the old system and the new system coexist? Because my experience of when I'm really having fun with work is it's almost like a new story is present in an old system, that I'm tuning into the sense of oneness, of connectedness, of empathy, and okay, so it's happening through the medium of money and a bank account and so on and so forth. It could just as well happen through a barter economy. So I would really like to just explore how the informal common economies and informal and formal economies, does anyone have any ideas about how they could almost like be part of intertwining narratives or part of the same story?
If I can go, I will. I love that you say energy, because essentially that's what it is. Every exchange is energy, right? Whether it's money, gift, whatever it is, we're just exchanging energy. And I think that's what, in part one, I think I talked a little bit about, and Catherine said it this time, you know, money is really the projections we put on it. That's really what it is. So it could be a useful tool depending on how you view it, or it could be a limiting tool if that's, and you've said it perfectly right now, right? It's energy, and you used to not enjoy it, and now you do, and because most likely you just changed your perception about it. Nothing else changed in what you've said. You're doing the same job, you're earning more even now. It's your perception that changed. So I think that's one key aspect of this. Now, when I think about systems, which was your question, I think I guess because what I care about is social justice. What I see that is wrong with the system is not the perception. Well, that is one aspect individually. The perception that we're putting on money and things is something that we do need to work on internally. But then there is a bigger system. And I think we've both mentioned it here in this conversation as well. There is a bigger system that is happening, and that is leaving some people way behind others. And so that is where I think the system needs improvement. So I think individually, for those of us who have the opportunities, yes, it is a flow of energy, and it is, and even for the broader system as well, it is a flow of energy. And our perceptions are going to change that flow quite a lot. But for those who have less opportunities within the broader system, it becomes a little bit more complex in my view. And that is when I say, you know, improving the system or changing it or whatever it may be. I think co-creating a better system is the way I like to look at it, is about those who are being left behind, not us individually.
Thank you. Kathy, anything to add to this?
Well, what I love is that we're bringing different perspectives and we're working on different arenas, and they're all critical. They're all really important. And my approach is to change my unhealthy psychology, then share how I do it and change as many other people's as I can. And to look to bring in the leadership, bring in our those who are forming our systems. And there are plenty of people who have no faith in our leadership. And I do regard them as innocent, and I accept and respect the people that don't regard them as innocent. But my approach is to hold them as innocent, regard them as innocent, and look at what's going on in their psychology, that they're making the choices that they are, and then looking to find the fundamental buttons to press, to tweak, that change change the mindsets that then change the systems that then affect the lives, the lives on the ground. And that's obviously a longer term solution, but it's a fundamentally necessary approach. And Viviana's approach of, yeah, but there's people who need stuff right now, is also critically important and an entirely valid approach. Yeah.
Thanks.
Wow. Okay, so we're kind of at the end of our conversation. Thank you so much. And I feel like there was so many threads in that conversation that we could have followed. And I think as we finish it, I'm just what's kind of coming into me and feeling really important is in a way kind of where we began. And I feel very much what MARIANELA brought to our preparation conversation around what really matters when the shit hits the fan, you know, what really matters. And that's values, that's people we love, you know, that's our, you know, our resources, our basic needs. These are the things really that are really going to matter. And so if people get nothing else from this conversation, I hope we will leave you just with some thought around those things. What really matters to you, as if you were living your last day, what's going to really matter, you know, what really matters to you. And sending our thoughts and well wishes to MARIANELA and her family, who are dealing with some very, very real challenges right now. So yeah, sending some thoughts to them. So this is our last. Oh, Kathy, sorry, did you want to add something before we finish?
I do want to make one more point, which is to say the links that I wish I could have remembered, I will get them together and we will make sure they are shared as part of where this is shared. So there'll be links to the links.
Thank you. And we have David has shared the links for Charles Eisenstein and your page on there. And Viviana, if you've got any more links to share around your work as well, please do let us have them and we'll share them as well. So whether you're listening to this on Facebook or YouTube or on the podcast, if you look in the information attached, you will see the links for all of the things we've been mentioning. And yeah, this is the last of our pilot conversations. I can't believe we've done 19 weeks. It's been a whirlwind adventure. So just to 19 weeks. So just to let people know what we're doing next. So we will not be having any conversations now for June. And then we will be doing an official launch of this project on Tuesday, the 6th of July. So we'll be back then. We'll be continuing. Same again, Tuesdays 6 till 7:30, British summertime we're on at the moment. And we'll then be continuing the project for a further year from that point, with a rhythm of 7 weeks on and 1 week off. And we've got some plans about what we're going to be doing, and we've got some openness about what we're going to be doing in those conversations. Some things we've slightly defined and lots of kind of open to ideas. So if you've really loved what we're doing and you think actually we need to talk about this is really important, Catherine, then please drop me a message or an email and let me know your thoughts, because we're really open to people's ideas. So you can either email me on communityresilience livetalks@gmail.com, or if you're on Facebook or YouTube, just message us there on either the page or on the comment section on YouTube. If you're on podcast, you will need to get onto Facebook or email to get in touch with us. We'd love to hear from you. And we will at that point, as well as coming back with the live talks, we're also going to be launching our website with more resource and information. And we will be launching Community Resilience Advocates, which we mentioned more in last week's conversation, if you'd like to know a bit more about that. So thank you very much, the three of you, for being back with us again. And particular big thank you to Kathy and David, who have been alongside me in the last 19 weeks of this project so far, and have created it to be what it is, co-created it to be what it is. So thank you very much for all your time and energy that you've given to this project so far. And it will be nice to have I will kind of miss it, but also looking forward to a bit of a break and looking forward to sort of focusing a bit more on the back of house things for our official launch. So yeah, thank you. And wishing you all well.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Take care. Bye-bye.
Community.